All right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you happen to be. We certainly appreciate you taking the time to come learn a little bit about contact tracing with us today. So I'd like to kind of kick things off by just introducing the speakers. So my name is Jack Stewart. I'm the marketing director at TEKTELIC. I'm going to be moderating this webinar today. Speaking today, I'm proud to introduce, also from TEKTELIC, our Vice President of Sales and Business Development, Barney Barnowski. From Senet CTO and COO, Dave Gendel, will be speaking. And from our great partner, ADTRAN, Head of Global Business Development, Keith Atwell, will be speaking today. All right, so the agenda that we'll be going through today, I'm going to provide a little bit of an introduction about how contact tracing is being utilized to help companies, enterprises return to work. I'll also provide a little bit of an overview of the network architecture of a typical IoT contact tracing solution. Senet is going to talk about the LoRaWAN technology specifically. They're going to talk about their network, their very robust network that they have, and how that network can be leveraged for contact tracing and other various IoT solutions. Senet also is going to talk about a few real use cases, IoT use cases that they're deploying today. TEKTELIC is then, Barney specifically will be speaking about contact tracing and why we need it. And then he'll introduce you to the contact tracing solution that TEKTELIC has developed and provide some information about that. And then ADTRAN is going to wrap things up by talking about how large enterprises like themselves are benefiting from this type of contact tracing solution, how they're using this, how they're using the IoT network for contact tracing and other IoT solutions as well, and talk about some of the deployments that they have on their campuses. So we've got some exciting content for you there. At the end of the session, we'll have 10-15 minutes or so for questions. So feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. We'll try our best to get through as many questions as possible, but we'll also provide you with some contact information at the end of the webinar where you can follow up with us if you still have additional questions. All right, so the reason why we're all here today is to discuss contact tracing and how contact tracing can be utilized to help businesses return to work, get back into the office, get office doors open. So essentially, from a contact tracing perspective, TEKTELIC has kind of looked at this concept in two different ways. The first one being proximity awareness and real-time notifications, which essentially is notifying employees when they're in contact with one another. And so being able to understand how close proximity one individual is from another and being able to notify them of that contact event, whether it's through an audio or a vibration alarm, something like that. And we'll explain a lot more about that in this presentation. Then the second piece that we're going to talk a little bit about is the actual contact tracing. So not just understanding those contact events, but actually logging those events so that you can go back and analyze who has come into contact with whom and, make strategic decisions if in the unfortunate case that somebody does, contract COVID and you need to isolate a certain member of your staff. So we'll be talking about the proximity awareness as well as the contact tracing. The typical network architecture for an IoT-based contact tracing solution like the one we'll be discussing is laid out like this. So, there's sensors, devices that individuals would wear. All of that data is sent through to a network via, in our case, a LoRaWAN gateway. Once it gets to the network server, there's a lot of powerful information that is stored and analyzed there. And Senet will be talking a lot more about the network server capabilities in their section of the webinar coming up here. And then, of course, you need to be able to visualize that data. You need to be able to make smart decisions about the data that you've collected, so it goes to an application as well. So to kick things off, Dave Gendel from Senet is going to be speaking a little bit about LoRaWAN, a little bit about the Senet Network server. So Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Jack. If you could move to the next slide, thank you very much. Yes, thanks everyone for joining, and we're very happy to be here and to describe a little bit about the components that make up a solution like this contact tracing solution that TEKTELIC will be talking about in the next section. So just a real quick background on Senet. Senet has been in the IoT market for over 10 years. We have been focused in the LoRaWAN component of that for the last 6 years. So we're founding members of the LoRa Alliance and continue to work very, very actively there. Senet primarily provides core network services. So as Jack said before, the network server component of it, the OSS and BSS to manage networks and applications and devices that leverage that. Senet goes to market exclusively through partners like TEKTELIC, like ADTRAN and others. So we're there really to take the complexity of the network component out of your hands and make sure that it's easy to go. As I mentioned, founding members of the LoRa Alliance, LoRaWAN is going to be the core technology that underlies the solution that we're going to talk about today. Senet is a sponsor member in the LoRa Alliance. We sit on the boards. We're very, very engaged there. I myself personally chair one of the committees as well. Jack, if we can move to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of LoRaWAN and the advantages that it brings to the market. What we're looking at and kind of at the beginning and what caused Senet to choose this technology was kind of several things. Certainly the technological benefits, but also the fact that the alliance and the protocol specification is open. It's an open alliance, it's an open ecosystem, it's an open specification for these long-range IoT communications. This technology enables you to provide and to build solutions that are very low cost, very low power. So typically, again, typical AA battery size kind of devices or less even. Very low cost. These devices can cost, $10, $20, $30 in that range. Certainly, there are more expensive and more complex ones as well. And they can communicate over very, very long distances. So that's where the wide area network component of this comes in. It includes built-in end-to-end security. That's the AES 128 security. That's present through all of the solutions in LoRaWAN. It offers support for bidirectional communication, so that's both from the device to the application as well as from the application to the device, for both fixed devices, devices that don't move, as well as mobile devices, devices that can be moving at very, very high rates of speed, hundreds of meters per second even. And then finally, one of the things that's very important is that LoRaWAN as a core technology supports firmware updates over the air. So you can update a fleet of devices with new firmwares in a very, very cost and power efficient way. We really are leading the industry in our ability to do this. You've heard about it in other technologies, but in LoRaWAN, it really is available and it really is very, very efficient. Jack, if we could move to the next slide, please. So a little bit about the importance of the network itself. So when I say the core network, the LoRaWAN architecture is really a modern, centralized SDN style architecture. And that's what that network server component is really. So this is a very, very efficient way to deploy a very, very large number of devices that may be manufactured and delivered by different companies, maybe implemented and deployed in various regions around the world. All of these things are very, very important and intrinsic in the architecture that we have here. So from a Senet perspective, we deploy that in a true cloud fashion, very, very scalable, obviously very secure, resilient, and cost effective to deploy it in that way. One of the things that's very important, though, is because this is all based upon these open standards, it means that you as the implementer do not have to trust your destiny to one company. You're able to make choices all across the technology stack, from who's your network provider to who provides your devices and your applications. And this really mitigates a lot of the risk associated with newer technologies and IoT solutions that are deployed in the market. It means you don't have to hook your success to a single vendor, whether that's a carrier or a technology. So very, very important that you have those capabilities. Thanks, Jack. That leads to, in the case of the services that Senet provides, a very, very flexible set of deployment options. So Senet actually deploys public network, is what we call it, so physical networks throughout the United States. in various regions. The region we're looking at here is the Bay Area in California. So we have a lot of coverage in California, on the East Coast, a lot of growing coverage in the Southeast as well. But that's not the solution for all applications. So certainly another very important element is the private network style. So this is where you as the application provider, the solution provider, are also bringing network to meet your needs. So this is very often the most cost-effective way to deploy networks for indoor applications and campus-style applications. And it's very unique in that that's something that the traditional cellular technologies, LTE-M and the IoT, don't allow you to do. So you really have this flexibility. And of course, you can combine those two things together. Again, very unique in this case, where you can take advantage of public network when it is available. And when it's not, you can add these very, very cost-effective gateways to provide coverage for your specific use cases in your applications. And of course, the coverage really spans a wide range of different use cases from indoor, that's okay, Jack, you can keep it on the next slide. From the indoor use cases to large regional outdoor use cases and everything in between. We're going to look at specifically here a few details around what we consider a campus-style application, a campus-style deployment. So there's really three phases of that network implementation, from design, installation, and then validation. Because the coverage, the range of these networks and these devices is so great, the design for this kind of an application is really quite simple. It really relies on rules of thumb about putting sufficient gateways to get redundancy and the level of coverage that's required for your application. We typically don't go to the level of doing a full-on RF finite element analysis for something like this, because it really takes so few gateways to provide that level of coverage. Just as a quick example, if you're putting a gateway on the top of a building or something like that, you can expect to get many miles worth of coverage out of that. Of course, you want redundancy and things like that, so that's an important element to consider as well. When you start moving indoors, this is where the rules of thumb really start to apply. You really are looking at making sure that you don't have dead spots that may be caused by shielded areas, specifically in hospitals, for example. They have shielded areas around the X-ray and the M&R kind of technologies. So you're working through that process there. Installation, again, is very, very inexpensive in terms of the cost of the physical equipment, the gateways that we're looking at here in the middle, as well as a very, very low requirement on the technical capabilities of the installer themselves. So in many cases, for these kinds of applications, you can rely on local IT or even facility staff to do the installation. Very, very simple, plug and play, and gets you started right away. And then finally, of course, we want to make sure those networks are really working. So again, Senet provides a set of tools that enable you to make sure that the networks you put in place are meeting the requirements and needs that you need to see. And Jack, if we could move to the next one. Of course, once that network is deployed, now you need to talk about monitoring, maintaining, and managing that solution. That includes both the network side, we call that RAN provider, radio access network provider. Being able to get alerts on issues with the physical equipment of the gateways, understanding trends and changes that are going on with the network itself. As well as the application and end device component of that. So being able to see trends associated with application behaviors or back-end core-to-core interconnect issues, as well as making sure that device onboarding, performance monitoring is all part of what it is that you're integrating with your solution. And finally, of course, the Senet NOC team and technical support team is available 24/7 to backstop you with any issues that you might be experiencing as you go through this process. And if we can move to the next slide. So that's kind of in summary, that's kind of a real quick walkthrough of the core network element and how networks get built and designed. I want to talk about one additional thing before I hand it over to Barney to go into more detail with the contact tracing solution. And that really is that because these networks are open and interoperable, built on standards, that means they are open to a wide range of additional solutions. So I'm going to specifically look at the two on the left. So some additional COVID-19 solutions that are part of kind of getting folks back into the office. But in addition to those, there's a huge range out of the ecosystem of all kinds of solutions. We have a few here that are kind of focused on building and campus infrastructure, everything from smart lighting to pest management to trash management, everything that you can imagine that's available there. We're going to focus here on a couple of that are more aligned with the COVID-19 problem space. So one of those is indoor air quality monitoring, and the other one is presence detection in the office. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Jack. So what we're going to look at for the first case is that indoor air quality. So one of the things that has been talked about extensively in the media and is proven from scientific fact is that well-ventilated spaces are very important for making sure that those spaces are safe in the presence of the times that we live in. So monitoring those spaces for that ventilation is very important. So we did some, we built some demos and have some use cases here that we wanted to show that talk about that example. So one of the things is that you need to instrument the space. So once you instrument the space, then you can understand what's actually happening there. So we saw some very interesting things here. So one of them was a very tight correlation between the humidity in the space and the VOCs in the space. And this indicated two things to us. One is that there was a VOC problem, so volatile organic compound problem, in one of the spaces that we occupy. The second one is that the air was not being moved through that space, so it was not being taken out of the space in a reasonable way. This investigation then led to an action. So HVAC equipment was repaired and replaced with more appropriate solutions that solved both of these problems. It reduced the humidity and it increased the turnover of the air in the space, making the overall space very safe. So we identified it here in this slide. And the next slide that you see, thank you, Jack, we're actually looking at the repairs in process. So when we see these repairs in process, we are looking at the motion detection in that space. It's this purple bar you can see on the left-hand side. In addition to that, while they were repairing, there was also a spike in the VOCs from them welding the new HVAC equipment in. And once that equipment was in place, there was an immediate reduction in both the humidity as well as the VOCs that were occurring there. Now, we continue to monitor this because we still see occasional spikes due to other events that are occurring in the system that are in the building that are indicative of the fact that additional work needs to be done to continue to improve the ventilation system here. So again, this is very important because this is something that we can now take back to our employees and say, look, we've monitored the space, we've improved the areas that need improvement, we continue to monitor it, and we can raise alarms if there are issues and raise items to the building management company to make sure that they get rectified in a reasonably quick time frame. So that's the first use case, thank you. The second use case is really more focused, a little bit more focused on the building management company. So there's a really interesting thing here. So as we prepared to come back into the office, our building management company came and said, here are all the things that we're going to do to make this space safe. One of them was a much more intensive cleaning regimen. So that was great, very important to get our confidence level up on our employees. However, one of the things that is true in human nature is that if you don't have kind of repeated reinforcement, things start to kind of slide. And so what happened was that for a period of time, the building is largely unoccupied. And so the cleaning staff, even though they have the best of intentions, they start kind of noticing these patterns and they go, you know what, nobody's in this space. I don't need to come in, I don't need to clean it, I don't need to empty the garbage, I don't need to vacuum, I don't need to disinfect because nobody's ever here. Problem is that once we then bring people back in, now people are there and they're not even checking these spaces anymore. So what we're trying to do is balance the safety of the employees with the efficiency of the building management company, who's having a hard time, you know, in these times as well. And we're doing that by tracking all of the spaces in the facility, not quite, and thank you, and presenting to them which spaces have been used in the last 12 hours or 24 hours so that they can make sure that they get clean. So what you're looking at here, the red dots are offices that have been used. They have this visibility as they come through in the cleaning early in the morning, and they can check that off and say, okay, we visited all of those spaces. We're actually using the TEKTELIC Smart Room Sensor for this capability. It has both the ability to detect temperature and humidity, but also presence detection and light detection as well. So it's very, very useful to providing that information back to the building management company. So they can optimize their expenses, only clean what needs to be cleaned, and we can make sure that the employees are safe. All right, thank you, Jack. Now my last slide, just to wrap up real quickly here. I wanted to re-emphasize that you know, Senet's role in this really is the core network, so it's kind of the middle of all of what's going on here. We're serving, and our tools are serving the other two principal aspects. So the applications, the solution providers, the contact tracing solutions, the building use solutions, environmental solutions, all of those entities can interoperate with our core platform in order to bring their solutions into the market. And then in addition to that, we marry them up with the right network components, whether that's Senet's public network, whether it's networks that's being provided by our institutional partners like tower companies and other operators, or whether that's being brought by the solution provider themselves, or a utility, or a campus, or a hospital. So thank you very much for your time. Hopefully this was instructive. And I would like to hand you over to the meat of the topic here now, to Barney. Barney, take it away.
Thank you, Dave, very much for the that introduction and the great overview of LoRa and your network. So first of all, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Barney Barnowski. I head up sales for TEKTELIC in the Americas. And before I get into the contact tracing solution, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to TEKTELIC and what we've been up to for the last several years in the LoRa ecosystems. So first and foremost, we're one of the leading providers of LoRa infrastructure and IoT solutions. So you've probably already heard companies like Senet, companies like ADTRAN, Keith will be speaking next, pick our gateways and pick our end devices for their specifically for their quality, and in particular with respect to the gateways for their carrier-grade capabilities. In addition to the gateways, over the last few years, we've significantly invested in LoRa end devices. So you heard David mention our smart room sensor, that they're utilizing that for microenvironment monitoring. But we've also developed devices for helping companies track their assets. We've developed agricultural sensors for helping farmers determine soil moisture. And we've developed a whole class of devices aimed at providing tracking as well as monitoring of different indoor conditions. As part of that, we've also developed a dedicated set of devices for addressing the need of contact tracing. And with that, we come to the question of why do contact tracing to begin with? I mean, on the surface, it's pretty straightforward, and I think we understand the general concept of contact tracing. But as we dig deeper into the real reasons and the need for contact tracing, we uncover some very important things and very important aspects. So first and foremost, it's really about safety, right? When we talk about going back to work, we want to ensure that employee safety is top of mind, right? So if we do have a case of COVID, we can very quickly identify who those individuals are and who else may have been exposed. Secondly, this is really about helping us to maintain and helping you maintain operations and minimizing impacts of any potential exposures. A very good and timely example is what was happening here in Alberta within our hospital wards. As soon as they had 1 or 2 cases of COVID, because they weren't doing very good contact tracing, rather than just taking out those infection vectors, they would shut down entire wards, whether people had COVID or not. So it was completely inefficient, right? Rather than pointing to several individuals, they would shut down the entire operation out of, to ensure safety. The third reason, as we're starting to see governments getting involved, is really regulations. Governments are starting to put actual regulations in place, as is the case in Virginia, state of Virginia, where companies have to notify their employees within 24 hours if there was a case or if a potential exposure may have occurred to COVID. So again, you may be, first and foremost, you want to maintain safety, you want to minimize impacts to your operations, but you also may be mandated to do so. And finally, there is also something that we really don't talk about, but we might as well talk about it here. It's really the whole notion of public relations. As we've seen examples time and time again, a couple of examples here from Alberta, is if back to work is done badly, you may end up in the news. Case in point, Cargill, the local meat packing facility here, was recently in the news because they didn't do a very good job of mitigating COVID, and they had a cluster. Similarly, a German company, which we'll come back to at the end of my presentation, called Tunis, had a similar exposure to a lot of their employees, and they also ended up in the news, and not in a very good way. So this is why we want to do contact tracing, and how we've been doing contact tracing also kind of falls short. So first and foremost, the folks here at Alberta Health Services in our hospitals, they're using paper-based contact tracing, which essentially amounts to not doing any contact tracing at all. Because even if there is a case of exposure, there's really no one that can very easily and quickly identify who the individuals were that were exposed to that particular person. So then we move to the center of the slide here, which is, okay, let's do this with governmental or enterprise type contact tracking applications that get deployed on phones. This type of approach has some merit, however, it also falls short. And the primary area where it falls short, not even from a technological perspective, but rather it's the whole notion of opt-in. People, a lot of people simply don't want to download the application. So first of all, it assumes you have access to a cell phone. Second of all, you assume that the person is encouraged or somehow decides to download this application so they can perform contact tracing. And the third assumption here is that they have their phone with them and that phone has Bluetooth on and is in fact charged. Which brings us to the third category of contact tracing, which are the dedicated single technology devices. Again, this approach falls short from an opt-in perspective because, again, the individual is required to do a lot of things in order to perform the contact tracing. First and foremost, typically they have to have the device recharged. Secondly, if they have the device recharged, they somehow have to get that contact trace data off of the device, which again brings us back to the smartphone, brings us back to the cell phone, and brings us back to a more complicated solution than what this needs to be. So with that, TEKTELIC introduced its own solution for contact tracing, which takes into mind all of the shortcomings that I just outlined with some of these other approaches to doing contact tracing. Specifically, what we wanted to maximize is we wanted to maximize the opt-in. In other words, wouldn't it be simple if we just gave everybody a little fob? You can see these little fobs that are pictured here. These are our distance guard devices that everyone gets. And minimize what the individuals have to do with those devices in order to have contact tracing. And the beauty of our solution is the individual has to do nothing other than wear the device. Because our application takes care of the rest of the solution, takes care of the rest of the contact tracing. Our devices do not need to be recharged because on a single battery, they will last for up to 3 months in the case of our distance guard light solution, or in the case of our distance guard solution, IP67 version, the enterprise version, it can last for up to 6 months, right? So the individual does not have to recharge the device. There is no phone or application that they need to synchronize the contact tracing data to, and all they have to do is simply wear the device. So in addition to being tracked for the contact that they are experiencing, the devices will also alert the user to the proximity with which they are to another individual. And this is essentially how the solution works. So when two individuals wearing the device come into close contact to each other and they break that preset 6 foot, 4.5 foot, 3 foot barrier, this is all settable in our application, the devices will initially wait 30 seconds. And the reason we have this offset is to ensure that if you're just simply casually walking past someone in a hallway, you don't start buzzing the device and creating all kinds of disturbances. We want it to be practical. So we wait 30 seconds. If after 30 seconds, the devices determine that these two individuals are now lingering and they're actually in contact with each other, we're going to give them a little auditory warning, right? And the devices will buzz and they give you a little beep. And it's like, hey, we've noticed that you're now in contact with each other and you clearly are much closer than what we've agreed to you should be. However, in a lot of cases, you may need to be that much closer. For example, in a hospital, a doctor may need to be servicing a patient and therefore they need to be closer than the 6 foot barrier. So after 1 minute, the devices will give us a second warning, just kind of as a reminder. And then the devices will stop vibrating. And the reason for that is because obviously there is a reason for you to be this close. However, we will continue logging the encounter. So we will continue logging that encounter until the separation. And the reason we want this data is because we want to know how long certain individuals are in contact with other individuals. Now, what happens if a third person or fourth person enter the circle? Well, the whole process begins anew. Basically, what we have is all three devices now, or all two devices that are already there will sense the third device. All devices will buzz after 30 seconds. There'll be an offset of 1 minute. After 1 minute, everyone gets a warning, and this continues on. Next chart, please, Jack. Okay, so We talked, and David talked a lot about LoRa. So how do we now get this information, this contact tracing information, off of the devices themselves and into the application? Well, this is where LoRa network comes in, because we were using the LoRa network to upload all of that contact trace information up into the cloud, into our application. Now, what happens if you don't have a LoRa network, which may happen, for example, if individuals want to go off campus and grab lunch, or, you know, as part of their, you know, cohort, they want to go off campus and simply be out of LoRa coverage. The devices are set up in a way that they can basically store and forward the contact trace data, which means that the devices will continue operating and continue providing you the contact tracing capability, even without LoRa signals being present. Once the individuals are back on campus or back within the LoRa coverage, that's when all of the contact tracing information will again be re-uploaded into the application. Okay, with that, let's look at what the application does. So the application which we're providing as part of this solution gives us the very important capabilities, specifically the number of contacts an individual has and the duration of those contacts. And obviously we have the ability to be able to set the time, monitor the date and time of the contacts, as well as manage the range and thresholds and how close these contacts were to each other. And of course, all of this can be exported further if you need to do further analysis, but from a very quick and the ability to quickly identify who was exposed and who that individuals may have exposed down the line, it's very easy with our application, because we can give you a very quick tree and you can simply trace down the tree and determine who the individuals are that may have potentially been exposed to one another. Okay, so with that, Jack, can I have my last chart? So with that, we believe this is the type of solution that is really going to resonate. In fact, we have numerous proof of concepts running of this right now. And by proof of concept, I mean we have a lot of companies who are testing this solution right now here in Alberta. I know my colleague Eric is literally just running around outside of the office deploying this with companies who basically are just lining up to get this solution. Really, the idea here is that, number one, people do care about safety, right? And this solution gives people peace of mind that we are taking responsible steps in returning to work safely. From an operational perspective, the key here is that you're going to be able to minimize downtime, right? So, for example, one of the local guys here in Calgary is a manufacturing plant, right? They want to be able to maintain operations even if some of their individuals are exposed to COVID, and they're going to know exactly who was exposed using this solution. And finally, from a regulations and from a public relations perspective, I mean, this solution just absolutely makes sense. And from a deployment perspective, once you have that LoRa coverage, or even if you don't have that LoRa coverage, it's extremely easy to stand up. As Dave Gendel was outlining, putting up LoRa coverage is extremely straightforward. You get a lot of coverage out of a single access point. So to be able to deploy this type of a solution on a campus is very quick, very easy, and you can literally start contact tracing within hours of deployment. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Keith Atwell from ADTRAN, and Keith will tell you more about ADTRAN, and he'll tell you about how they're using this solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barney. Tell you what, Jack, if you jump into that first slide, we'll just hop right into this. So we'll do a little overview of ADTRAN, just as it kind of gets us into part of how we're thinking about how we handle what goes on with how we create our resiliency in our business and our supply chain. So ADTRAN, founded in 1985, we do broadband communications. We sell in over 60 countries around the world to all the major carriers, providing telecommunications equipment, primarily on broadband access. We have between 2,000 and 2,500 employees worldwide, between direct and contract employees in facilities that we maintain. And in doing that, we ship over 3 million units per year. And we've made a really strong effort in dealing with the tier 1 carriers to have a flexibility and a resilient supply chain. Hop into the next slide there, Jack. So if we think about what it takes to create a resilient supply chain and a resilient business, it's diversity. And so what we've done is we have, look around the world, we have 3 different R&D centers, the US, India, and Germany. About 50% of our R&D resources reside in Huntsville, Alabama, and then 25% in Germany and the rest in India. Also along with that, from a global manufacturing standpoint, we about a third of how we do our manufacturing. So a third in the US, primarily in our Huntsville facility. We have JBL in the Ukraine, in Europe, and JBL Vietnam in Asia. And the importance of that is that we have diversity both from the supply chain and who does our manufacturing, as well as locations and geographical diversity, depending on what's going on around the world. So it really makes for a resilient supply chain. One other piece, hop right back real quick if you don't mind, Jack. Just to note, and it'll be important just a second here, and how we look at this, is in the North American marketplace in our Huntsville facility, we actually do manufacturing, but also we have probably over 50% of our inventory goes through our Huntsville facility. So we have warehousing and shipping out of Huntsville. So now you can hop to the next slide. So as we look at ADTRAN itself and how we try to go back to campus, one of the biggest things we're trying to figure out how to do is get more people back on campus so that we can maintain our business. Currently, what we do is we have what we call on-site mission critical personnel. So we're probably right at 20%, maybe a little bit less than that, of our people who are actually in the facility, in our Huntsville facility, and those around the globe. And we try to come up with a plan of how we bring those people back, or bring people back to campus when it becomes appropriate to do so. Obviously, there's things we've got to worry about to do that. Key at all that is keeping our employees safe. Employees are our key asset and key to making us successful. We got to keep those safe. And in doing that, we got to be able to prevent and reduce any COVID transmission among the employees and be able to track that. And all this is to also help maintain a healthy business operations. And so the more we can protect our employees and protect our resources, the better off we are from a corporate standpoint, and the better off we can help maintain that healthy environment to work in. So we actually have a group committee inside of ADTRAN working on bringing people back on campus. What they have kind of went off and done is laid out a groundwork of what we want to be able to do to bring those people back on campus. First of all, we got to have pre-screening and for any kind of campus entry. We actually already have this in place. It's more manual than it should be at this point, but it is looking at making it into an application where it's more automated. But there are obviously a set of questions you have to answer and have the appropriate answers before we can bring you back on campus. Then once you actually get to campus and come on, we have thermal scanning, so basically taking your temperature and making sure you have your mask on and checking. Right now it's manual. You check, make sure everybody is supposed to be allowed into the building. Anyone to get into our building right now has to have senior VP approval. So our OSMC employees already have that, and anybody addition has to have that. And I think actually now we even require a negative COVID test before you can come on campus if you're not one of the already predefined OSMC employees. And then once we get you on campus, we want to be able to do contact tracing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But that's to make sure we can keep track of, in case something comes up and someone who was on campus was deemed as COVID positive, we have to be able to track that and make sure we keep all of our employees safe and make sure we keep our environment safe for working. And then finally, what we want to be able to do with all these systems is integrate them with our own IT systems. So we want to automate that so we have a better opportunity or less opportunity for mistakes and a better opportunity to keep things on a schedule that we can do that in a quick and efficient manner. Let's hop to the next slide. So what that pops down to is through all the pieces that we're doing, we jumped in and grabbed the contact tracing piece first. And we actually looked at multiple applications for doing how we do contact tracing. But what we kind of looked through and with some of the partnerships we already had in place and people we were talking to, had the conversation with Barney at TEKTELIC about their contact tracing application and presented it to our team. we said, let's bring it in and try it out. So we're using the TEKTELIC sensors and the applications that go with that Barney described just a minute ago. We have TEKTELIC outdoor gateways. We actually have one TEKTELIC indoor gateway. We have some ADTRAN indoor gateways in the network as well. Those are used to supplement the locations. And then we're using the Senet LNS and actually have all these gateways and sensors being monitored through that. There's a little detail of our network. The ADTRAN campus is 80 acres in Huntsville, Alabama, in our Cummings Research Park. We have approximately 1,500 employees in that location. Varies depending on manufacturing needs, but that's our typical run rate is 1,500 employees. And look at this. If you look at the network, here we go. This is the fun part of what the network looks like. We have 3 different towers: East Tower, North Tower, and South Tower, and currently have gateways on top of the East Tower and the South Tower. The East Tower gateway is about 100 feet up in the air. It sits on top of the building, and the South Tower is about 80 feet up in the air, sitting on the building. And then you notice down to bottom center there, we have, in the manufacturing area, we have a indoor gateway that's deployed, and that's actually helping with our contact tracing as well as a specific application that our manufacturing folks wanted us to do, monitoring some chambers that they have to doing humidity and moisture mitigation on components. This actually gives us the ability to cover our entire campus, all 80 acres, as well as I think has been mentioned before, we can get easily 2-mile radius around our campus that we can monitor. So if our employees decide that they want to go out for lunch, there's actually two different large mall areas. You can't see in this picture, but they're east and west of us, and have restaurants and shops and stuff. And if you go out there, we can actually still monitor them in that location, even though we don't need to do that with this application, because it actually stores the information if they come into contact with somebody from the company outside of that. Let's hop to the next slide. So on top of the East Tower, that's the TEKTELIC Kona Macro Gateway. And what that actually does is, it's the gateway that communicates with the sensors and provides information up into the Senet Network server, and basically manages the RF information. On the right-hand side is the ADTRAN 7310, which is an indoor LoRaWAN gateway. And this is specifically located in our manufacturing area to help us with one of the chambers that we have running there. The chambers actually has about a 2-inch thick metal cabinet, so that it's hard to get a signal out of that. But we actually, the gateway on top of the building actually can read that, but it's not as reliable as we'd like it to be. But we can read it, and we're actually impressed with the performance we get from being inside of that chamber, metal chamber that blocks all the RF, most of the RF, but not all of it, obviously. So next slide, please. So here's what we developed in the ADTRAN campus. We have the TEKTELIC Contact Tracing Sensors that we have. We've done a proof of concept, went well, and we're actually now in our first pilot, have it deployed with one of the groups within our company, and they're doing it to the next level. And what we're trying to do there with that pilot is, we have it, and they're going to run it for a couple of weeks, and we're going to sit down with the team, and as we get our results back, our final results, and say, what do you like, what didn't you like? And then our IT guys are looking at it and saying, how do we integrate this into our IT systems? But in the network standpoint, we have the TEKTELIC sensors, the ADTRAN and TEKTELIC gateways, and the Senet Network server. And then on the back end of that, we're running the TEKTELIC application, which allows us to track all the contacts that each of the sensors have. So, part of what was discussed earlier with Dave was, typically you have multiple applications that you want to run in a building to do different things. And what we initially started was actually working with our facilities and manufacturing teams to install LoRaWAN. The reason we like LoRaWAN in our applications is because whether we're talking above ground or below ground applications and anywhere on our campus, LoRaWAN gives us the ability to monitor the devices out there. We actually have a campus-wide a Wi-Fi network, but it doesn't give us the same depth of coverage that we get out of our LoRaWAN applications. So with a lot less gateways than access points from a Wi-Fi network, we have much better coverage. Now, obviously, there's different capabilities in the two different technologies, but for what we're doing with the monitoring and maintaining our facilities, the LoRaWAN is an awesome application for our facilities guys, and we're starting to deploy more and more capabilities there. So we kind of changed directions when the contact tracing thing came up and went with our first, I'll call it the anchor application, was contact tracing. But what we've also done is now gone in with our manufacturing folks and done asset tracking, or working on an asset tracking application, and have deployed our first proof of concept on the component monitoring, the monitoring chambers. And then what we're working on facilities for the follow-on applications is the air quality monitoring, CO2 monitoring. We do some of this today with our current HVAC systems, but each of our systems is disparate. Depending on the industry that you bring in your different applications in, they have their own set of rules and set of protocols that they work with. And what we're trying to do is centralize all that into one system within our IT assets that can track everything. So whether it be irrigation, whether it be pest control and management, whether it be environmental monitoring, we want all that under one window if we can. And so ultimately we get to one pane of glass where we can see everything. And so what that kind of leads to is, if you look at this, the campus-wide network, if you look at the center of that, the gateways and the network server remains the same. And that's the same thing we've deployed for contact tracing. Now that we've added the component monitoring and environmental monitoring, we've just added new sensors, and we've added a new application to monitor that, but the core network is still the same. So what we're looking at, and what's really important for a lot of the larger enterprises as they bring these things onto campus, is the ability to, once you have a network installed, be able to take that anchor application and invest in it, and then more cost effectively invest in the oncoming applications. So as we grow our campus applications, our network is not going to become so costly that we can't afford to maintain it. So I think it's actually my last slide there, Jack. And so at this point, I think we bring it into questions. Real quick, I say thank you for your time. For doing this, and we really appreciate everybody taking the time out of the schedule today, and we'll be able to let Jack monitor the questions and take over from here.
Sounds good. Thank you, Keith, and thanks again, Barney and Dave, for your contributions. And that was great. We have had a few questions come through during the webinar. So, Keith, maybe if you want to pop back on screen here, this first question I think is actually for you, with regards to ADTRAN. So it's saying, during your initial POC or contact tracing pilot, what has been the overall reaction of the employees?
Well, so that's interesting. I had my mindset of what the problem was going to be, and that it would be that you're tracking me, and I don't like that. In our first pilot, it was actually almost the opposite of that. Is everybody understood the importance of doing this? But what really said, probably 80% of the people who commented back came back and said, the issue is we didn't realize how close or how far away actually 6 feet is. So when they said that and the buzzers go off, they had to readjust their mentality of how close they can be to one another and still be in excess of 6 feet. So maintain your social distancing. Was actually the biggest issue that we had. And to me, it was a surprise because I figured that we'd be able to manage that part of it. But that was, some of the guys said it's almost irritating that they have to be so far away from each other because they're used to being within a certain window. But it's a really positive thing in that it lets everybody know that 6 feet is a little bit farther than you think it is.
Thank you for that, Keith. That's some great insight there. Barney, there's been a few questions that have come in specifically about the TEKTELIC Contact Tracing Solution.
Yep.
The first one here is someone's asking, why did TEKTELIC choose a LoRaWAN based solution versus something like Wi-Fi?
Okay, very good. So certainly Wi-Fi is an option for something like this. However, what we really wanted to do is maximize battery life, right? And LoRa as a technology gives us a phenomenal battery life for these devices. And that's really the main reason, right? Also, from an infrastructure perspective, if you want to deploy something quickly and you don't want to get bogged down by having to deploy Wi-Fi, maybe you don't have full Wi-Fi coverage everywhere, LoRa again solves that problem beautifully, right? We get extremely good coverage out of very few access points. Other questions?
Yeah, so the next one I think is still about the TEKTELIC solution. So it's talking specifically about the solution and how you had discussed that if somebody is passing by another person in the hallway, the device isn't going to buzz. I guess the comment is, would there still be a possibility that those two people could be infected? And maybe another way to put it is, even though they haven't received that buzz alarm, is that contact still recorded?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we wanted to do is we wanted to be practical, right? I mean, the devices are going to hear each other, even if you're in proximity, you know, within that 6 foot proximity, you're going to hear each other. What we wanted to avoid is an office where, as people start getting back to work, having, you know, incessant beeping and buzzing, right? So we wanted to be kind of practical, where if you have a prolonged contact, i.e., you know, at 30 seconds, that we create that reminder. Certainly, the virus spreads, right? But as we've seen, you know, at least from the research that's been published, you know, the longer you are exposed, the more likely you are to have it spread, right? So, you know, it is a tunable setting. We can set it, you know, if it makes sense for the organization to, you know, a longer window or a shorter window.
And then just kind of piggybacking on that one a little bit. So this next question says, so the device seems to be great if two employees are wearing the device, but what if they go shopping and come into contact with someone else who's not wearing the device? How does it track the employee coming into contact with a friend or a stranger?
For sure. The whole premise of the contact tracing solution within an enterprise is really about understanding who comes in and out of the enterprise, and we ensure that that person is contact traced. Certainly the people that are wearing the devices could be exposed to a stranger. They could be exposed to their family in the morning, right? We're not expecting the kids, you know, to be wearing the devices. So you could get COVID from someone in your house. What we do want to track is we want to track the fact that this particular individual has COVID, right? Maybe once they develop the symptoms, you know, day 5, day 6, regardless of where that infection came from, once they're on campus, we're going to be able to track them.
Okay, very good. So this next question, I'm not sure who wants to take it, maybe Barney or Dave or even Ken, but it's with gateways mounted on a roof, how good is in-building penetration with LoRaWAN?
Yeah, I can take that. That's no problem. So yeah, we have a lot of experience with that, and I think it's shockingly good. So I think a lot of people are used to other wireless technologies where things like that might become, you know, real significant barriers to success. But we've actually seen scenarios where we've gone through, you know, over 20 floors of reinforced concrete from the roof down and providing coverage throughout buildings. So of course your mileage is going to vary based on the construction of the material as you're going down. But in the kind of buildings that that Keith showed there, you won't have any problem providing coverage throughout that entire building from a roof-mounted gateway. And certainly gives you the ability to look out much further. So those antennas are optimized for the horizontal plane, not the vertical plane. But certainly you can get other antennas or mount them in other ways if you are looking specifically and only to provide connectivity in the building itself from a roof mount.
So I want to add one thing to Dave's response. Just in the example that we had, the device we had in the chamber reporting to the gateway on top of the our east tower is about a quarter mile away through, you know, all the way through buildings for about half of that. So we were able to see the sensor with no problem if it wasn't inside of the chamber. The only reason we augmented that capability was because we had the 2-inch metal thick doors on the chamber that block the RF signals. And sometimes we can still read it then. So to Dave's point, yeah, it's pretty awesome how it works. Our RF guys were really impressed with how well it worked.
That's great. Thank you for that, Dave and Keith. Barney, this is another question specifically about the TEKTELIC solution. So would you be able to talk a little bit about how accurate the distance measurement is for the devices?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly we can tune it, to, 2 meters, 1.5 meter, 1 meter. So the accuracy is very good. I believe there is an error around that. I don't remember. I think it's something like 20 centimeters plus minus. But in general, with respect to being able to maintain those social distances, I think it's very accurate from what we've seen from the testing that customers have been doing.
Sounds good. And then there was a follow-up to the same question about, so in addition to contact tracing, is this solution able to record the actual locations of where these contacts occurred?
So that's a great question. And technologically, this is possible. However, because we wanted to ensure that we built this device with GDPR in mind. So GDPR is the privacy framework specifically in Europe, as well as, I think there is a US equivalent of it as well. We have to ensure that the solution remains anonymous, right? So even if you look into our application, all you're going to see is device IDs relative to the contacts. And it isn't until someone actually has COVID and we actually need to determine who to contact that we basically kind of open up the database and go and match up the device IDs to the actual individuals. So certainly as part of that and as part of the privacy considerations, at least for the contact tracing solution, we are not providing the location data.
And Barney, just one more technical question about the TEKTELIC solution. So does the TEKTELIC solution, the devices specifically, support firmware updates over the air?
Not in this version, but obviously I understand the LoRa Alliance is still finalizing that. So I believe we're going to be supporting it in line when all of the other network servers, I believe Senet's network server and all the other network servers start supporting that capability. Okay,
and then so I think so this next question is asking how accurate the proximity sensing portion of is the solution. So you kind of covered that. Is there any sort of impact based on how the sensor is placed or how it needs to be worn?
We've designed the sensor to be worn either on lanyard or on a belt. There aren't really any sort of other special considerations. Obviously, if you shield it with something, right, and put clothes over it, or you wear it underneath your clothes, you're going to impact some of the RF characteristics. But in general, what we really aimed for is kind of like I outlined at the beginning of my presentation, absolute ease of use, right? So the only burden on the person is having to wear this device, right? We don't want them to have to sync it. We don't want them to have to recharge it. Just put it either on your belt clip, put it on your lanyard, and it's going to do the rest.
Okay, and then I think we have time for maybe one more question here, Barney. Do you want to speak a little bit just at a very high level about what this solution would cost somebody?
Certainly. The costs really, in volume, these devices are less than $50, right? We're trying to target the adoption here. Certainly, in lower quantities, the price is going to be a little bit higher. But the idea here is that for this to be useful to customers, it has to be priced, attractively, right? Then, on top of that, there is a, notion of application software as a service fees, which again are quite low. But yeah, certainly if people are interested, myself, Jeff, Eric, obviously you, Jack, are here to provide quotes and set people up. We have, I guess, one thing we haven't mentioned is that we are in production with this now, right? So getting samples and getting units for your testing is remarkably straightforward right now. So just get in touch and then we'll send you some units, right?
That's great. And Barney, in saying that, just so everyone's aware, so on this screen that I've had open here, you can see some contact email addresses. So if you do have any further questions or would like to follow up, please reach out to the respective company at the email address there below. We will continue to monitor any questions that we may not have had time to get to and follow up accordingly, because I know, sorry, there's a few left in the Q&A box there, but But we're out of time, so I'd like to conclude this by thanking everybody for joining us today to learn a little bit more about contact tracing and how large enterprises specifically are adopting contact tracing solutions to help their businesses return to work. I'd like to also thank, of course, Barney, Dave, Keith for providing some great insight into LoRaWAN, into contact tracing, and I think we all learned a lot today. So with that, I'm going to close off the webinar, but thank you very much for participating. And again, email address is on your screen. We can follow up with any further questions you may have.